Sci-fi and fantasy, two sides of the same coin? Maybe. I'm here to propose a way to define and actually differentiate between the two genres, which I believe if you take either one far enough in a different direction, they can really easily overlap and become hard to define and almost indistinguishable from one another. My proposal is this. The simplest way to boil it down is fantasy is a story that takes place in a different universe, galaxy, world, essentially, right? And usually has medieval or magical overtones or elements to it, right? Sci-fi, conversely, takes place in a futuristic version of our world specifically. If it is in the future, and that future is supposed to stem from our world, and the science in it, the technology in it, is based in our real-world understanding of science, that is what makes it sci-fi, as opposed to fantasy. Now, some examples of this, right? I think Adventure Time is a really fascinating example of the crossover between sci-fi and fantasy because Adventure Time is supposed to take place in a post-apocalyptic sci-fi future, right? However, thank you, darling. There's a key moment in the Adventure Time mythos which goes back to like the early days of the world. And in the early days of the world, we found out the Earth is composed of four elements. Fire, ice, candy, and slime are the four elements that compose the world. In my opinion, this firmly cements Adventure Time as a fantasy show with sci-fi overtones, but firmly cements it as a different world and therefore a fantasy show. The Warhammer 40k universe is not sci-fi. It is fantasy through and through. That is a crab, yeah. Is Warhammer supposed to take place in a distant future version of our universe? Yes, but one of the core tenets, one of the core elements of Warhammer 40k is the Emperor. And the Emperor is a reincarnation of 40 shamans who used magic to reincarnate themselves and turn themselves into a singular being in our past. Therefore, shifting the origin of humanity and events through human history enough to which I would argue it is not our world, despite claims that it is a future version of our world, but they've changed the laws of our world to enough of a point to make the series fantasy. And if you dive in a little deeper, even the origin of species is basically giant eldritch space frogs who created most of living life, which is not, pardon the phrase, canonical to our universe. I'd love to hear dissenting opinions, or if you want to comment below with a series that you think is traditionally sci-fi or fantasy to see if it fits this definition. Of course, the definition isn't going to be perfect. There will probably be exceptions and rule breakers and all that good stuff. But as the elves in my book, which is, I think, fantasy, say, may you walk